All right, well, we're ready to hook up all our various bits and pieces into an ice material. We do, however, before we do that, need to do one more thing in here to our nodes. We created a specular, but what we're missing is an opacity output. So I'm coming into Add Node, Output, and we will call this opacity, and we will assign its usage to opacity. Now we have all the various outputs that we need for this stuff that we made in here. And now it's just a question of hooking them up. I'm actually going to take this frame. That's one of the other nice things about frames. You can do stuff like this when you've got a big, giant, unwieldy material like this. I'm going to drag this in here for now just so I can see which masks I'm using. It makes it a lot easier so I can have things big and see what I'm doing, then move this back to where it belongs when I'm done. Right, so we're going to need to combine this combination of scratches and grit with the crackles. Let's start at the bottom. Okay, our rough areas. Let's get our blend node. Now, I want my rough areas. Let's take a look at our bevel here again. These, we're going to build these normals in a minute, but this is the height. So this is going downwards. And in here is where I want my crackly ice that has the high specularity and my, the smooth one. And then up here, we'll have the one with the scratches and the noise. So that means that we are going to use, well, we could do it either way, but I'm going to use the inverse of that mask, which means that anything that goes in the foreground is going to be in the white areas. And that means that I want my roughness for the crackles to appear in those white areas. So I will put that in there. And then this I will use as my background. So we have our rough areas with the scratches here, and we have our crackle areas here. And because we've set this up in such a way that we can go back to the source and adjust the the levels in either place, we can get these now. Once we're done actually hooking them all up, we'll go back through these guys and get their relative opacities or roughnesses or whatever set up the way we want it before we go any further, just like we did here when we mixed these guys up. So that's the roughness done. Now the specularity, again, we'll bring this in. We can have, we might as well just use the same setup. I want the specularity for my crackles to go on top, and I want the specularity for the rough areas to come in at the bottom. We'll save the normals for later. Let's just do our grayscales first. And let's come up here to the opacity. And again, we can do the same thing. We'll take our inverse mask. We'll use this opacity as our background, and then we'll use this opacity as our foreground. Now the normals. We're going to have to do a little something extra for the normals because we have a normal in here in the bevel, and I want to be able to use that. And I want to combine it with the other stuff that I've made in order to get a better normal map. So let's grab another blend node. I'm hooking this into the normal. So this is the normals that I'm getting out of that bevel. And that's why I kind of wanted to keep them big like that, because it's giving me this really nice sort of crystalline look to it. And now I want to fill this in. I don't want it quite so flat and straight, and that's where the crackles come in. So we want the crackles in this area. again, we're going to use this node. We're going to get the normals from our crackles. And I'm going to use an overlay here. They do make a normal blend node. I just don't really think it does an extraordinary job, and it's more computationally expensive, so I do it this way. And I'm going to ramp up what I'm seeing in here because I want to look at these together. Let's really ramp it up because I really want that crackly. And by doing an overlay, it's combining with what's already happening in there, so that's pretty nice. And that gives us the basic area inside. What we haven't dealt with is what's going on up here, and that's this stuff. Let's get another blend node, and we're going to apply this on top of what's happening here. But we need to cut out the areas where we have our crystalline stuff, and that means we're going to use that mask. And we can again make this an overlay. What's happening in here though is this is very flat right now, and that's kind of weird. I mean, you could, I suppose, if you like carved ice, you could get like these really super flat bits, but it's never gonna, at least in outdoors, it's never really gonna be completely super flat like that. And I don't really want to get too involved in the minutia of what we're doing. If you want to spend hours and hours making your own ice, that's great. But I want to do a quick and dirty thing here to kind of make these flat areas a bit more crystalline. I'm going to get a transform 2D node, and I'm going to take the results of our crackles here, and I'm just going to make them bigger. And then we'll make another normal off of that one, which we can overlay on the results of this before we send it into here. And I'm going to make that, again, let's make it stronger. And that's going to give us this sort of thing. So all of the ice, there's no part of the ice that's completely flat. And there's always something going on. And then we lay the dirt on top of the higher bits. And that is our normals done. Finally, our color. Well, why don't we just start with the color, because we're just going to plug that in there. That'll be our color. Let's see what those normals we just made look like. Now, it looks pretty good. So we're getting like the top bits have some kind of scratchiness to them, and we're seeing our little scratches there. But there's no part of this that looks completely flat. And let's plug the rest of our bits in. This one is, oh, we have to get rid of that height. Roughness. We could have changed this to our opacity. We're not going to use a height. The way that Unreal does it, we have to use a translucent material, and it doesn't support height. So that's our roughness. This is our specular, and we have our opacity. Oh, you know why that's not showing up? Because I forgot. Actually, both of those nodes. I'm going to do all of them together. You can right-click in here and view outputs in 3D view, and that's just going to resend everything out to the renderer. Or if you want to do it individual node by individual node, you right-click on the node, and then you actually assign the channel to it. But now we've got our opacity in here now. And this is our ice at its absolutely most opaque. So it's more or less opaque, but you can still kind of see through it a little bit. And that's exactly what I want. Now, before we go any further, let's try to make this more symmetrical, I guess. I mean, it's all very big and very out there, but I'd rather have it like this than all cramped up, because you can at least see what's connecting with what. The last thing that we need to do is we want to set up some variables so that we can adjust the opacity and the roughness when we have it in the game engine. So I'm double clicking on my graph. I'm going to make some more room in here. And I'm going to create some input parameters. And we'll call one opacity. They'll both be float ones. And we can set the default at 1. Yeah, that's all fine. And we'll make another one, and we'll call it roughness. And the defaults are fine. So we have our two variables. And what we're going to do is we're going to create levels nodes in the appropriate spots. So on these three things that we're going to adjust. And then we'll create functions that work together to create the effects that we need. Which is this one. This is actually really the easiest one of all to deal with, because as we want it shinier, as we want it smoother, we just bring down this level out high. And that means that all we really need to do is assign roughness to this, which is the same thing as creating an empty function and grabbing up the variable, but that just automatically did it for us. And since we had the default set to 1, that's its default anyway, so it hasn't changed our image at all. The next one we want to deal with is the opacity. So if we come into our levels node and see what it actually does, as we bring our high down, it gets more transparent until we don't see it at all, which is something else we're going to have to take care of. And again, this one is a straight up correlation between what our slider says and what we have in here, except instead of doing, well, I'll do this and then we can come back in to edit it. So that just grabbed up the variable for us. As we brought that slider down to 0, this ice completely disappeared. And we don't really need that to happen because that doesn't happen. So I want to set a floor for how transparent my ice can get. And in order to do that, I'm going to get a comparison. So I'll do it, I don't know, less than. I'll get a constant. And then I'm going to get an if-else statement here in control. And this is a Boolean result, so that's going to be our condition. And we'll just set up a statement. So, I don't know, let's say, I think 0.5 is probably a good number in here. If our opacity is less than 0.5, so we've moved the slider down to the middle, so it's at half transparency. If it's less than 0.5, I don't want you to go any lower. Just make it 0.5. If it's not less than 0.5, then have it whatever the slider is telling it to do. And now I'm going to set this as my output node. And what this is going to do, and we have to use the input parameters now because we've actually set the variable. So if we bring our opacity down, 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 it's not going any further down than that 0.5. And if you really wanted to get tricky, you could make some math to, have that distance and have it all be between 1 and 0, but I can't be bothered. But it's doing what it needs to do in that it's stopping our transparency. The next thing we need to do is address the roughness, and I just want to see how rough it goes. We may not even need to change this one. I mean, that's at its roughest, and then at its smoothest. Yeah, I think we can keep that. But what we are going to need to do is to adjust the specularity, because if we, the specularity needs to move along with the roughness, because you can't have it be very specular and rough at the same time. It doesn't work. But then again, ice will never be 100% specular. It's not glass. So we're going to have to put a limit on our specularity. And at the same time, it's actually going to need to move in the opposite direction from our roughness, because we're coming at it from the low as opposed to a high. So we're going to have to do a little bit of fooling around. Let's get into our specular, and we're going to come into our levels in low, level out low rather, sorry. Let's create an empty function. We know we're doing this based on our roughness, so we'll pick up that variable here. And I'm going to get a constant, and I'm going to assign 1 to that. Now, if I want, when my roughness is 1, I want my specularity to be 0, and vice versa. If I subtract roughness from the number 1, that's actually going to work out. And let's take a look. As my shininess, as my roughness, actually that's my roughness, as my roughness gets smoother, I get more and more specularity. And they are moving opposite to each other. There is a problem though, and you can't really see it too well in this renderer, but you can sure see it in Unreal once we bring it in there. That if you bring this specularity all the way up when the roughness comes all the way down, it's too specular. It shines like a mirror, and that's not what ice does. So just like we did with the opacity, we're going to have to put a limit as to how specular it's going to go. And we're going to do it exactly the same way. Let's come back in here. So we've got the beginnings of what we're doing here. And again, we're going to set up a conditional statement. So we'll get a comparison. Let's get a greater. And let's get another constant. And again, I think 0.5 is a good number. So let's use 0.5. And we'll get an if-else. And we're going to do the same thing again. So if the result of whatever is happening in here is greater than 0.5, that's my condition. If that's what's happening, then that's what I want. Oh, sorry, no, I got that wrong. Then I want 0.5. Otherwise, I want that result. Let's make sure that's correct. Right. So we're going to get our roughness. As our roughness is getting rougher and rougher, that's getting less and less specular. And then the test is coming in here, and now we're below the 0.5 mark, and we're getting smoother and smoother here, but our specularity isn't changing. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. And I believe we are ready to move into Unreal. So let's go ahead and take our material and publish it to our Unreal demo workspace. And let's see what's going on in the engine. To use substance materials in Unreal, you actually need a plugin. And you go to the marketplace and you search for substance plugin, you get the plugin, and it will ask you to install it to engine, which you do. And then once you're in the engine, you have to come into plugins and you have to enable it for the particular project that you want. And then you need to restart, which we're going to do now. And we're back. We can close this. We now have Substance plugin installed, and we can go ahead and import our ice. We're not going to have it create a material for us. It's probably more trouble than it's worth. And we're just going to go ahead and import the substance. Then I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new material, and we'll call this ice. Yeah, I was fooling around with it before. And we'll open it up. The first thing we need to do when we're creating something like ice is we have to change the type of shader that we're using and the type of material. We're going to want it translucent. And you'll notice that if we just leave the shading the same, I mean the lighting model the same, it's going to block out a lot of stuff that we need. We need to also change this to a surface translucency volume. And now it's going to give us the correct inputs that we need to create our ice. I'm going to right click and we're going to get a texture sampler. And we have our color, opacity, normal, roughness, and specular. So we need 4 more of these. And we can now assign our various textures to them. So we can come in here. I'm just going to type in ice. I'm also going to copy that so I don't have to type it again. And you'll notice that we don't have our specular in here. And that's because we have to come into the instance and actually tell it to import it. It doesn't automatically do that one. We'll save it. We'll come back to our material, and it's now going to appear in here for us. And now we can hook all these guys into their appropriate positions. Right, let's take a look and see what this does. And if we come back into our instance, we can take a look and see if our sliders work. So our opacity is going down, but it's not disappearing completely. And our roughness is getting rough, or it's getting shiny. What it's not doing is looking like ice. And that's because there's no refraction. And that's the final thing we need to do, because the way light passes through ice is very different from the way light passes through air. And the angle by which it's bent is, called its refraction. And that we have to do is actually set up a calculation in here and then plug it into the refraction. In order to do this, we're going to need to grab a bunch of nodes in here. I'm just going to get them. So we want a couple of these. And we're going to need a noise. And we're going to want a constant. And a Fresnel. And a lerp. And a multiplication. Okay. The first thing I want to do is set up this noise. I don't want my I want my edges to be kind of rough when the refraction happens. And I'll just call this the blur. And if we plug this in to here, we can then go into the node itself and set up what we want this noise to look at. I'm just going to put these numbers in here and you can fool around with them. We want it simplex texture based. The turbulence will turn off and we'll set it like that. The next thing I want to do is set this up. And I'm gonna put in a fall off amount. And then we're also going to want an index of refraction. Well, let's name this. And the index of refraction is the actual result of the math formulas that are involved in how much refraction happens with what kind of material. And I literally went and Googled it, and the index of refraction for water ice is 1.309. And we're going to leave it at that. You can, everything has its own index. If you want to make some other kind of material, just go ahead and Google it and it'll give you the right number. And we're going to put this constant up here and we're going to call it the number 1. And now we're going to do the linear interpolation for the actual refraction. We're going to put the Fresnel in the alpha, and then we're going to put index of refraction in the B spot, the number 1 in the A spot, and that's our refraction done. And then in order to link these two guys up, we're just going to multiply them together. And then we take this result and we plug it into our refraction. And there you have it. It's starting to break up the stuff that's going on behind it. So let's apply it to our big ice cube. And lo and behold, we now have refraction in our ice. And we can mess around with our slider. And it's actually looking kind of like ice. So the next thing I was going to do is to come in here and just do some fine tuning before we closed out the material. And I realized that we forgot to take care of our color. And we can consider that fine tuning our material. And we're just going to repeat the same pattern that we did here. So we're putting our crackles on top, and then we're going to take the color from our mix and move it in here, and then replace our color output, which is actually giving us more color variation, which was kind of the idea. The couple of things that I wanted to take care of now as far as the fine-tuning, looking at the material as I saw it in Unreal, was that I would like to see, let's get this back. I had to reboot my computer in the middle. I want to get that environment back. So I'm going to click my environment is visible, and that will bring back that scene in the background so it can actually look at our opacity. I'd like to see it less opaque at its maximum, and that means we're going to go into our opacity node. I just want to make sure that that is what we're talking about here. Yeah, so that's opacity there. And this node here is going to be carrying that function that we want to adjust. And I'm going to take this constant and I'm going to bring it down to, let's say, 0.3. And that will allow it to get less opaque. And then the other thing, well, there's a couple other things I want to take care of. I want to see more variety as far as the opacity goes between the rough areas here and the smoother areas. And I want these smoother areas to be a little bit less opaque in relation. Right now they're pretty even. And I kind of did that on purpose in the beginning because I want to see what it looks like more or less, at the same level. What I'm going to do now is we're going to essentially repeat what we're doing here, where I'm going to add a levels node specifically to that opacity, which will let me look at it in relationship to what I've got going on in this blend. So I'm double clicking on the blend, and then I'm single clicking on the levels node that I want to change, which will let me look at my results in the blended view. And I'm going to just get this whole thing darker. So this will be maximum opacity. And the other thing that I'd like to take care of in the same way is what's going on with my specularity. Just, the difference between the two areas. So I'm going to highlight that noodle, click on a levels node, and that'll pop a levels node in there. And if I double click on the blended result, and this is at the least specular, I want this to have less specularity, because that's still too specular. And I'm going to bring that down a little bit too. And I think that's going to take care of our fine tuning. Obviously, you're making your own material, and you can adjust all these things exactly the way you want them. We've actually put in a lot of functionality in here as far as making this material your own for whatever purposes you actually need it for. I'm going to click here, we'll publish this out, and I'll meet you back in Unreal. So here we are in Unreal with our improved ice, and I think it does look better. We've got more variety in the coloring. We've also got more variety in the opacity. And if we take a look at our sliders, when we bring it all the way down, it never gets completely transparent, but it looks pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with this result, and I hope it's been helpful in helping you make your own materials using Substance Designer and Unreal. And I'll see you in the next one.